Welcome back to the Portal Iceberg. It's been a while. This video is going to be a fair bit longer than the last few, and just a little bit darker. Please do leave a comment below if you think this longer video was a good idea. Thanks again to It's the Bean guys for making this iceberg, along with Maroon, Alex, and Morality9 for your assistance in research. We're past the surface level. Welcome to the shallow waters. Now, let us begin. Along with the release of Portal 2, Steam includes the game's original soundtrack as a free download for owners of the game. While nearly all the music from the game is present, and it even adds music from the first game, the radio and Jonathan Colton mixes for Still Alive were missing. These were eventually added, but it wasn't until 2022 that we would get a clean release of the radio mix. Ellen McLean, the voice of GLaDOS, wrote a song for the character that would have been used in an alternate ending, but this is not in the soundtrack to this day. The song Exile Vilify by The National is also not in the soundtrack, despite appearing in one of the Ratman dens in Portal 2. The cake core from the first game lists many items as though they were ingredients for some kind of recipe. Indeed, the first few that it says could be included in a cake recipe, such as, chocolate cake mix. However, several of these items do not make sense, such as electric needle injector or fish-shaped dirt. Some fans have speculated on what the recipe might actually be for, and some of these theories get quite dark, such as some way of preparing a body. But I don't think there's any coherent answer to give here. The cake sphere is simply broken, and it's saying nonsense, along with actual cake ingredients and a few things that sound a bit more sinister. I don't think it's much deeper than that. At some point in Portal 2's development, it was thought that the voice heard in the early test chambers would be GLaDOS, instead of the announcer voice heard in the final product. Several of the unused GLaDOS announcer voiced lines still exist in the game's files.
In the event that the Enrichment Center is currently being bombarded with fireballs, meteorites, or other objects from space, please avoid unsheltered testing areas wherever a lack of shelter from space debris does not appear to be a deliberate part of the test.
However, these lines were just going to be pre-recorded messages. It's not like GLaDOS would have been speaking to you during these parts of the game. If I had to guess why it was changed, I'd say probably to avoid confusing players who expected GLaDOS to be dead. Many have noticed that some of the technology seen in 2001: A Space Odyssey looks like something Aperture would have made. GLaDOS in particular has a strong resemblance to HAL 9000. Each of them have a single colored dot that looks like an eye. If I remember correctly, some developer commentary confirmed an artistic inspiration. Naturally, there's a fan theory that tries to connect the two. I'd say there's a neat headcanon there. Okay, I promised it would get darker with this one. Valve explored many concepts for Cave Johnson's appearance in Portal 2, but ultimately decided to simply have him be a series of recordings. During development, there was an idea to have a cube that was containing a simulation of his brain. This cube would have been abandoned in the older part of the building and lost to time. Upon meeting him in Portal 2, he would have asked the player to unplug him. Interestingly, this is not the first time Valve had considered this idea. After retiring from Valve, writer Mark Laidlaw made a post to his blog titled Epistle 3, and fans of the Half-Life games quickly surmised that this was one possible storyline intended for Half-Life 2 Episode 3. In this story, we learn that the villain Dr. Breen had his mind transferred to a slug-like host body. Upon meeting the supposed Breen grub in Episode 3, Breen would have made a similar request to the player. But there's more. In Aperture Desk Job, you meet a giant computer running a simulation of Cave Johnson, and as you guessed it, he requests to be deactivated. If you can describe a fan theory, someone has probably pitched it. And if someone hasn't yet suggested a fan theory, then someone probably will soon. In Half-Life 1, you can find this photo of a baby inside Gordon's locker. While I'm sure we agree that this is probably just Gordon's niece, nephew, or maybe his own kid, some have suggested this is also Chell. I've always assumed it was a joke, but maybe there's someone out there who actually believes that theory. During one of his pre-recorded messages in Portal 2, Cave Johnson claims that Aperture's competitors have stolen several of their inventions and taken credit for them. The portal gun and the gravity gun seem particularly similar in appearance, and one of them even appears in the Lab Rat comic. You can also see an HEV suit charger. It's possible that these were first invented by Aperture and then copied by Black Mesa. Or it's also possible that Black Mesa and Aperture simply bought these from a different company altogether. Portal 2 and Half-Life 2 Episode 2 include references to a research ship called the Borealis, which would have been the focus of Episode 3, but the game was never finished. The Borealis was a reused concept originally intended to be a location you could visit in Half-Life 2. Some of the maps from this phase of Half-Life 2's development have been leaked online, and you can get an idea of what the interior might have looked like. In Half-Life 2's 20th anniversary documentary, game designers explained that the idea was cut because they felt gameplay in a cramped space like the inside of a ship would not have been very fun. We'll just have to wait until a new Half-Life game is released to see if this location ever gets reused. Early in Portal 2's development, there was an idea to build the game's story around a hub world that connected multiple testing courses. The player would be tasked with retrieving various personality cores to rebuild GLaDOS and help her regain her memory. Each testing track would feature a unique personality core. Instead of Chell, the player would have been a new character called Mel, but protagonists were disappointed when GLaDOS didn't recognize them, so Chell was reused for Portal 2. The core hub concept was scrapped entirely because the multiple testing tracks made it very hard to design a difficulty curve for the game. The personality cores felt too similar to each other, and also because Valve wanted to explore more locations than only the destroyed testing chambers. Some of these screenshots look visually closer to Portal 1 than to Portal 2, so it's probable that Valve was still in the middle of the transition to Portal 2's eventual design philosophy. We also have some cut dialogue from this point in the game's development, some of which was given to an announcer character, but much of it is completely unused, and we don't even have audio for it. This is one of my personal favorite little points on the iceberg because it's just a really funny gag. At one point, Valve showed off a few animation and dialogue tests for Portal 2. I believe this one is probably from the Core Hub era, when GLaDOS was recovering her memory.
I think I used to be bigger. There was a party. Something happened with food. Starts with a C. Cereal!
I'd like to know what the dialogue after this would have been. Before Portal 2's writers came up with the character of Caroline, Cave Johnson had a different assistant, a character called Greg. He is mentioned several times in the Perpetual Testing Initiative, and his muffled dialogue can be heard occasionally. This could mean that Carolyn doesn't exist in these other universes. You may have seen a picture of him if you've played the Portal board game. His image is modified from Dr. Magnuson, a character from Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Data miners have found several maps from Portal 2's development inside the Nintendo Switch version of the game. This has been the first major leak of development assets since Portal 2's release. If you'd like to know more about this discovery, Ossiflow's video will be linked in the description. In both Portal games, you can see tubes which transport test equipment between parts of the building. The air pressure in these tubes comes from a device called the Pneumatic Diversity Vent, and although it is still present in Portal 2, its prominence has been greatly reduced. One of Portal 2's teasers showcases them as a test element, where they suck turrets out of a room. These were cut from the test chambers because designers felt there weren't enough ways to implement them in a level to keep them interesting. We do know that diversity vents have the ability to route different items to different tubes if needed, which could be why Wheatley and Chell ended up separated during Portal 2's tube writing sequence from Chapter 5. Some theorists on Reddit have asked if any Zen creatures from Half-Life might be living inside Aperture. I think it's fair to say Aperture probably had some contact with Zen, but probably not nearly as much contact as Black Mesa. From Half-Life 2 Episode 1, we can tell that antlions in particular like to build colonies deep underground, so old Aperture could be seen as a good habitat for them. Still, without any evidence of a Zen infestation in Portal 2, this theory doesn't have much to stand on. An earlier model of GLaDOS appears in the wake-up sequence. It is actually 3 models and borrows more heavily from the first game's design for the character. This model was actually very rushed and was planned for use in the teaser seen in E3. One idea was for GLaDOS to curl up into a ring to disguise herself as a way to survive between the games, but this was eventually dropped. There is a fan theory that attempts to answer how GLaDOS got corrupted, and proposes that GLaDOS was actually made by placing a more complete scan of Carolyn's mind on top of a flawed scan of Cave Johnson. Since we know Valve had considered a Cave Johnson robot for the game, this theory has some plausibility. In my opinion, Portal 2 is very clear that GLaDOS is Carolyn, and that Cave Johnson died before the technology was ready. The circumstances of Carolyn's upload are probably the reason she's so hostile to humans. For a small number of Portal levels, the elevator doors are not solid, allowing you to pass through them. This happens mostly in Chambers 14 and 19. However, this only seems to work if you played the previous map in the same save file. You can sometimes destroy security cameras by placing a portal on the wall they're attached to. Portal has an achievement for doing this. GLaDOS also has special dialogue for it, but this doesn't seem to work correctly. In Chamber 19, there's a special voiced line for if you've destroyed every camera you can up to that point, but the code to count the number of cameras destroyed will not track unless you wait for GLaDOS to stop speaking before destroying the camera. As long as you don't break any cameras early, you can hear this rare line.
At the Enrichment Center, we promise never to value your safety above your unique ideas and creativity. However, do not destroy vital testing apparatus.
Not much is known about Shell's origin in Portal. Valve does not always release that much detail about their protagonists, possibly to help with the immersion. Still, we do know a handful of details. We know she was present for Aperture's Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, and we know that she was adopted. We also know that at least one of her adopted parents, her father, worked at Aperture. The Lab Rat comic indicates that she has extremely high tenacity, and that she was excluded from testing for this reason. The lack of lore hasn't stopped fans from presenting several theories to expand on her origin, including a few that were mentioned in other Iceberg videos. Now for possibly one of the darkest items on the iceberg, at least so far, Aperture's kill count. It's hard to say exactly how many people were in Aperture when GLaDOS was activated, and how many she therefore killed, but we can make some estimates. There's an obscure voiced line from the announcer which gives us a useful hint.
By completing all test courses, you have achieved Level C security clearance. You may now access all testing courses and 3 of Aperture Science's 176 restrooms.
Now, since we know that Aperture is based in Michigan, we can use Michigan's building code to guess the number of occupants using the number of restrooms. Oh, and if it isn't obvious already, I'm not a building inspector. Going off the guess that Aperture falls under the factory and industrial label, we can say that Aperture needs 1 restroom for every 100 people in the building. Now, at 176 restrooms, that would mean Aperture can have up to 17,600 people in the building without violating the code. That's, in my opinion, possibly the closest you can get to an upper bound for how many people worked in Aperture. It also occurs to me that this number feels really low. I don't know, I feel like the nearest real-life analog to Aperture Science might be companies like Northrop Grumman or General Dynamics, each of which have employees measured in the hundreds of thousands, not the tens of thousands. Instead, Aperture might be a much smaller company, and this quote from the announcer says there's 176 restrooms in Aperture Science, not the Enrichment Center, not this one building. It's saying the entire company has 176 restrooms. If that's the case, then yeah, 17,600 employees is a reasonable upper bound. Oh, and before you ask, yes, that line from the announcer is actually used in the game. It is not just some cut content. During development of Portal, there was an idea for a turret to be able to walk around for a more difficult challenge. Though it ended up being cut, it wasn't the only time Valve considered turrets that could move. Flying variants were also considered. It's well known that Portal is in a shared universe with the Half-Life games. Portal was developed alongside Half-Life 2 Episode 2. The central antagonist of that game is the alien empire known as the Combine. A piece of dialogue you might have missed in Portal could hint that GLaDOS knew about these aliens and was actively trying to keep them from breaking into the building. During the fight at the end of Portal, you can hear her say this.
Are you trying to escape? Things have changed since the last time you left the building. What's going on up there will make you wish you were back in here. I have an infinite capacity for knowledge, and even I'm not sure what's going on outside. All I know is I'm the only thing standing between us and Unless you have a plan for building some supercomputer parts in a big hurry, this place isn't going to be safe much longer.
I've got some theories about how the Combine's interaction with Aperture might have gone, and it goes a bit deeper than this. So if you'd like to know more, you should watch this video I made a few months back. One unused testing element for Portal 2 was a form of a checkpoint that you would have to pass through. They would work on a timer, and you'd have to pass through multiple in a short time. This community map by Tajiv restores their functionality. A demo version of Portal was released for both Steam and Xbox. Called the First Slice, it was set to stop the player from playing past Chamber 12, but this still has the other maps in it. Using the Out of Bounds glitch, you can skip to Chamber 13 and then complete the rest of the game as normal. There's also a mod being worked on called the Second Slice, which recreates some of the unused ideas from Portal 2. Wheatley was nominated for Best Character in the 2011 Spike Video Game Awards, and Valve created a video of him acknowledging the nomination. However, they also needed to have one ready in case he won the award, so Valve's YouTube channel has a video of Wheatley's reaction and acceptance speech, even though the award went to Mark Hamill's Joker from Batman Arkham City. Portal 2 was nominated for Game of the Year, Best Xbox 360 Game, and Best Original Score. It won Best DLC, Best Multiplayer, and Best PC Game. The year before, Portal 2 also won Most Anticipated Game. Excel Vilify and Want You Gone were both nominated for Best Song in a Game. Stephen Merchant and Ellen McLean each won awards for their performances as Wheatley and GLaDOS. Oh great, more unreleased content. Valve planned on publishing an art book for Portal 2, containing concept art, sketches, renders, and commentary from people who worked on the game. While it was scheduled for October 2012, it has never been released. Out of Bounds Cubes. Valve used its in-house source engine for both Portal and Portal 2. This engine requires that a character be physically present in the map for it to speak. For this reason, whenever an unseen character has a speaking line in a source game, they're probably somewhere out of bounds. But those characters who are out of bounds don't need to use the same model as their other appearances. For Portal 1, cubes can be found out of bounds, which produce GLaDOS' voice. Valve initially announced that Portal 2 would have multiple expansion DLCs after it's released. In typical Valve fashion, the number of them was a bit less than you might expect. You might consider the 6 Sense Motion Pack a DLC, but the proper ones are Peer Review and the Perpetual Testing Initiative. Peer Review is mostly focused on the co-op mode, adding a new cooperative testing course called Art Therapy, but it also adds a new challenge mode for both single-player and co-op maps. Players can compete in either quickest time or fewest portals. The other DLC is the Perpetual Testing Initiative, which is the Steam Workshop's community-made levels. Both DLCs are included with the base game, and do not need to be downloaded separately. Dota 2 is a massive online battle arena game made by Valve, the same company that made Portal. They often include references to their other games as items in their multiplayer games. In Dota 2, there's an item called the Benevolent Companion, which closely resembles a companion cube from Portal. Its relocate ability matches the particle effects from Portal, and uses the portal gun as a sound effect. Its first blood and kill responses come from the first 2 bars of Still Alive, the credit song from Portal. In Portal 1, several of the test chambers include computers that scientists would have used to observe the test subjects. Most of them have these modern-looking monitors with orange text scrolling past. The text contains mostly gibberish, but mixed in you can spot what seem to be cake ingredients, along with many things that don't belong in food at all. In Test Chamber 16, a couple of these monitors use a different design, which has a chin that reminds me of the all-in-one IMAX. This design was used earlier in development and was replaced with the normal design, but someone forgot to change these with the new model. Portal Still Alive is the standalone Xbox 360 release of Portal. It includes 14 chambers not present in the Orange Box or PC versions of the game. These chambers make use of a few new mechanics that add for a much greater challenge. Today it is playable on Xbox One and Series consoles. These extra chambers in Still Alive are originally from a mod for the PC version, called the Flash Version Map Pack. While the mod has 40 levels, Still Alive only uses 14 of them. You can get the Flash Version Map Pack from We Create Stuff's website, but there's a much newer mod that has the same content. Released in 2017, the Still Alive for PC mod includes the 14 chambers from Still Alive, but with improved lighting, along with the full 40 levels from the Flash version map pack. It also includes some cut content from Still Alive, and a proof-of-concept GLaDOS voice for the mod. If you're looking for some high-quality Portal content with some extra challenge, I think the Still Alive for PC mod, or the original Flash version map pack, are excellent choices. If you're hearing this, then you have just sat through 20 minutes of Portal lore, and 20 minutes of my voice! If you think that was time well spent, you might enjoy some of my other content on my channel. There are 3 other videos in this series already uploaded, along with a variety of other videos you might enjoy. I'll see you soon for part 5.